So, good morning. My name is Dina Demilawi. I'm one of the pathologists in CHIO, and I'll walk you through a histology of the musculoskeletal system. In the previous videos, we speak about bone matrix, bone cells. Now it's time to speak about cartridge and types of cartridge in this video. So, cartridge. Cartridge is different than bone. In histology section, pathologists recognize cartridge by the blue or the pale gray blue matrix. So when we look here, the matrix is the thing that hugs the cells inside, right? So the background of the cartridge is formed of this color. This color, you can describe it as blue. This color, you can describe it as pale gray. But we cannot describe it as pink. That's not pink anyway. Pink means bone. So when I see that, it means cartridge. Why cartridge have this color? The reason the cartridge have this color, because it's rich in a substance called aminoglycans, proteoaminoglycans. So proteoaminoglycans stake the hematoxylin part of our stain, which stains things purple. When the cartridge is rich in the aminoglycans, in the proteoaminoglycans, the blue become more intense, so it gives more towards the purple. When it's like diseased cartridge, doesn't have a lot of aminoglycans, it start to be less blue. It shouldn't be pink. So that's number one constituent of cartridge is the aminoglycans. One thing we have to keep in mind about cartridge, that 90% of the cartridge is formed of water, because cartridge has to be very resilient. I mean, just I'm walking like this and I'm just hitting my cartridge, tach, 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 in my knee, because all my body is transmitting on it, tack, tack, tack. So it has to be very resilient. And water make this cartridge very amenable to change and accommodate all these forces that's coming onto it. The other constituent of cartridge is collagen, like bone, but different, not collagen type 1, is collagen type 2. So the predominant collagen type in cartridge is cartridge type 2, is collagen type 2, not type 1 like in bone. And then we have cells of the cartridge. The cells of the cartridge are those ones. And as we know that purple, the dark purple color, stains the nuclei, so each cell has this small dot of dark blue which represent its nuclei. And the cartridge cells are called chondrocytes. Chondrocytes. So these are chondrocytes. And like what we have seen in the bone, we had cells that were called osteocytes in the bone. They used to be sitting inside the matrix in a space, and we call the space lacuna. Cartridge is no different. So the chondrocytes are those cells that sit in the blue matrix, because it's cartridge matrix, and they are surrounded by space that we'll call it lacuna. So chondrocytes sit in a space in the blue matrix, and the space is called lacuna. One thing to know that this is in our sections, we see this lacuna in the cartridge. But in true life, if it really, in my cartridge right now, the chondrocytes fill the whole space. There isn't a white space there. It's the chondrocytes, the size of it is actually corresponds to the whole lacuna, to the whole space. What happened, as I mentioned, when we take the tissue, we have to cut very thin sections, so we put it into processing, and through processing, the chondrocytes shrink. Their cytoplasm collapse on their nucleus. So there is a space that's created, which is artifact. It's actually, there was no space, it was the whole cells big that it occupy the whole part over here, and there was no white space. Okay, so we met cartridge. The type of cartridge we met right now is called hyaline cartridge. And it's the main type of cartridge that we have in our musculoskeletal system. It's formed in the articular cartridge and in the growth plate in children. So, this section is from a growth, from a child, and represent the growth plate, the physis, the metaphyseal plate of cartridge that's responsible for kids that lengthening in kids. So we get height and we get taller because when we are kids, we have this physis, or we have this metaphyseal plate of cartridge that's responsible for new bone formation and increase the bone length. So I see physis or metaphyseal plate of cartridge only in children. And we can see that the matrix here is very, very, very blue. It's dark blue. Children have tons of proteoglycans. Their cartridge is way away from osteoarthritis. Healthy children are like this. So it's very blue background compared to the previous one of C. The growth plate have a peculiar arrangement that enable the bone to grow in length. So we can see that on the surface, the cartilage cells, the chondrocytes, are just small. Then they start to increase in number, but their size doesn't change. As we go more deeper towards the diaphysis, we can see that the cartilage cells become bigger, and we call this zone of hypertrophy because the cells, imagine this is a chondrocyte, become so big. Look at the beginning of it, was so small. And then what happened to them, they die. Because at this site where they die, the cartilage start to change to bone. And the first step is that calcium influx happened, and when calcium started to come at the base of the growth plate, it start to change the metabolism and the environment around the chondrocytes, so they die. And what happens from the side of the bone, from lower down, osteoblasts start to come, as I'm showing with my arrow over here, and use the templates, the matrix, in between the dead chondrocytes and change them into bone. So you can see the cartilage here is changing into red, into bone, because osteoblasts used it and started to put its osteoid on, which stains as pink. And this part, we call it the primary spongiosa. And this is the first step for formation of the bone. The articular cartridge doesn't have growth plate. This is articular cartridge, and when we look at it, there is no growth plate. But it still recapitulates a little bit what we see in children. First thing, this is in an adult, right? So the first thing, we can see the aminoproteoglycans is not very, very, very blue. It's not like in children, which is very, very, very healthy cartridge. It's a little bit on the pale gray because there is less aminoglycan because it's from an adult. We can see that the cartridge at the side of the joint over here is more flattened. It goes more bigger as we go deep. When we are starting to reach the subchondral bone, which is here, which noted by the pink, very pink color, and even some suggestion of lamella formation over here, the interface in between have a blue line that I highlighted with these two red arrows and represent the tide mark. So the tide mark represents the calcium influx in the cartridge to start to change it into bone, and that's it have a similar, so the articular cartridge and subchondral bone have a little bit similar physiology, little bit morphological resemblance compared to the growth plate in children. Okay, so to summarize, this is the tide mark, this blue line representing the calcium influx. Above it is the articular cartridge, below it is the subchondral bone. We can appreciate the pale blue matrix in the cartridge compared to the pink, red-pink subchondral bone matrix. Second type of cartridge we'll speak about is Fibro Cartridge. So Fibro Cartridge is present in the intervertebral discs, and its its morphology is a little bit different than hyaline cartridge. It still have the pale gray matrix, but we can see that the chondrocytes are much higher in number. And the other thing, they are smaller and don't have lacuna. Some do have lacuna, but not all of them. So you can see the Fibro Cartridge. It's really, the matrix is still pale gray, although the matrix have more collagen compared to the hyaline cartridge. And the other thing, the other clue is that the chondrocytes don't have a lot or don't have lacuna, much lacuna as noted in hyaline cartridge. When the intervertebral disc start to degenerate for whatever the clinical reason for that, when we get the material as pathologists, we see it just frayed and that cartridge, and that's what we see on the right image, where the cartridge is already frayed and that and necrotic, because in a case of herniated disc. And this finished my third video on cartridge. I didn't put any questions on, but I hope if you have any question, you can revisit the video. And that was just a quick preparation on histology of cartridge, and looking forward to see you at the workshop.